Good morning.
Hello.
Welcome to this impromptu, informal, virtual town hall. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. My name's Walter Hudson, and I don't know that I've ever pronounced your last name, Daniel.
Brighton Bucher.
Brighton Bucher.
Daniel Brighton Bucher.
That's what I would have imagined it would have came out as, but I didn't want to get it wrong.
Sure, makes sense.
So I'm just giving folks a couple of minutes to start tuning in here, and I also am trying to upload some stuff for us to potentially take a look at as we have part of our discussion. So if you're watching this on Facebook, you should be able to scroll down in the comments and see the link to be able to join us. This is kind of like a Zoom call where any one of you, literally anybody listening, this is as open as it could possibly get. Literally anybody listening can join and be right next to us talking about this in exactly the same way that we are. Let me get that link up here. I think you're necessarily going to be able to copy and paste it from just looking at it here, but you can certainly enter it into your browser if you're interested in joining us. And I'll see about putting it in the chat. Yeah, it looks like I can. So I've just put that out to the chat as well. All except Facebook. That's odd. Well, let me make sure I put it on Facebook. And I'm not sure if that went out or not. But I know I've got it in the Facebook feed. So, all right. So basically what we're trying to do here is this is a virtual town hall with highly experimental, completely open to the public. Literally anybody can join and be part of this and talk with us. It's kind of like a Zoom call. And the purpose of it is to have a discussion about a book that is in the 9th grade curriculum of the St. Michael Albertville High School called Speak. The author's name we'll get here. Oh, it's right here. Lori Hulse Anderson is the author of the book. And this book contains what might be considered explicit depictions of sexual assault. And it's being placed in front of the eyeballs of 15-year-old boys and girls, our children, students. And there is a group of concerned parents who have come together in an effort to try to get this book removed from the 9th grade curriculum because they do not believe that it's appropriate for that age level. That's the most concise summary I can come up with what it is that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do this though? Why have a live stream? Why try to put together a virtual town hall? And who am I? Who is Dan? Why are we the ones doing this? These are all valid questions. Well, let's start with who we are. My name is Walter Hudson. I'm a city council member in Albertville. I also happen to be a candidate for state representative in District 30A, which covers St. Michael and Albertville. That's the last you're going to hear about that during this, because that's not what this is about. This is about the book and being a parent and a taxpayer and a resident in the St. Michael Albertville School District. And I've gone to the 2 school board meetings this month to address the school board during the open comment section to talk about this book. Daniel is somebody who I reached out to. He's the host of a podcast called Logical and Right. And you can tell folks about that, Dan. But the reason why I invited him to come on here is to kind of act as a proxy of the audience who doesn't know anything about this and is learning about it for the first time, so that he can ask questions that kind of flesh out what the controversy is and what the issue is and try to get to the heart of the matter. Anything you want to add to that, Dan?
No, I'm just a regular guy for the most part. Live in Buffalo, lifelong conservative, except this isn't really a political thing. And yep, running a website and podcast called logicalandright.com, where I'm just trying to get information out there for like-minded individuals in Buffalo and Wright County. And, something I enjoy doing. I like writing. It's fun to talk to people. And I've gotten to know Walter over the past few months. Big fan of him, obviously. And yeah, just here to delve into this issue. Obviously, there's lots of stuff going on around the country as far as books in schools. And I have a daughter, a younger daughter in school. So, it's an ugly world, but I feel like the issue of this whole ordeal is what is necessary and what is appropriate to be. I mean, it's one, and I don't think at any point we're going to suggest, burning books, like,
Most definitely not. No.
and I'm guessing I even may fall on the more liberal side of you when it comes to, art or reading, movies, stuff like that. But it seems that there's a fine line where a book is in a curriculum and it's basically forced reading, and it's kind of like, is there anything better?
Right.
Does it, I mean, is this truly is this a literary masterpiece?
Right. We'll talk about that. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm here to play devil's advocate sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe I will be the devil's advocate.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And let me just say, like at the bottom of your screen right now, you've got that URL. If you're just joining us, that URL is, you type that into your browser and you're going to pop up on here with us. And that's out there for anybody, whether you agree with me or not. In fact, I especially want to hear from the people who don't agree with me, because I know what I think, and I'm going to have ample opportunity here to express what I think about this book. But I'm just humble enough to recognize that I don't know it all, and that there may in fact be a cogent argument for including this in a 9th grade curriculum, putting it in front of 15-year-old eyeballs. And I would love to hear what that argument is and what it may be. The only, there are a few loose rules. Now, this is all highly experimental, right? Like I've never done this before, put out a live stream and put out the link for literally anybody to join it. I'm sure there are all sorts of folks who advise against that sort of open transparency with no safeguards, no guardrails. But that goes to the why of like why I'm doing this. I think we need to get away from that. I think the over the past few years, especially, there's been this tendency to insulate decision makers and policymakers and officials from authentic, genuine, real conversation with the people to whom they're accountable. And part of my frustration in dealing with this issue and other issues is that you have the trappings of democratic process and public hearing, where indeed you can go to the school board, as myself and a group of parents have this month twice, and you can ask to speak at the beginning of the meeting during what's called the open comment or the public comment period. And we do this at the city council here in Albertville as well, where there's a period set aside where anybody can get up and say anything. And there are some reasonable limitations placed on it. We give you 5 minutes. The school board gives you 3. The school board limits the discussion to 4 people per side of a topic. And, you can make the argument that some sort of limitation in order to facilitate getting the business of the entity done is appropriate. But what it does translate to is that there is no real open debate, open public on the record debate about the merits of any position. It's just, here's what this guy thinks, here's what this gal thinks, and often no response whatsoever from the people who are actually making the decisions. They just sit there and nod and thank you for commenting and then move on with their agenda.
Mhm.
And that's the way it's structured. I don't feel as though that's an effective way to engage, for the community to engage with policy. And so that's why we're doing this today. And I also feel that just going on social media and making posts, which I've done, and commenting in comment threads, which I do, is not a particularly effective way to have these conversations either, because there's something lacking in text, in
Mhm.
comments, especially, and just the nature of how social media works. It's not designed to be particularly thoughtful. It's
Mhm.
not designed to be particularly transactional. It's just sort of people shouting their thoughts at each other without really having to process what the other person is thinking. And so that's why I'm trying to do this. So there are a handful of um, loose rules that I want to put up here, and I think these are pretty reasonable guidelines. So rule number one, if you're going to join us today, is just, we don't want any anonymous participants. So if you're good, it's kind of like when you do go to the school board or you go to city council or whatever, they ask you, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? The idea there is, this is a public record. If you're going to come out and state something about public policy, then you ought to be willing to put your name next to it. Rule number two is, be respectful, don't embarrass your mom. So we're going to try to engage with one another, even though there's no doubt going to be vehement disagreement on this topic. We're going to try to engage with each other in good faith and presume the best of intentions of the other person. Seems pretty straightforward. Rule number
Mhm.
three, stay on topic. If you want, we're talking about this book, we're talking about the ninth grade curriculum, we're talking about academics. Maybe we can veer here and there, but generally we want to stay within the bounds of talking about that topic. We're going to respect people's time, try to be concise, and we're going to allow speakers to make their points. All right. So, kind of a rough agenda for the balance of our time today. I want to talk about the book, kind of describe what the issue is, talk about the history of engagement on this issue of having it included in the ninth grade curriculum at STMA, talk about the current status of where we're at with the policy and the process of addressing the policy, and then kind of look ahead to the future of where we think things might go or could go. So before we do any of that, we do have one person who has already joined us that I'm anxious to bring on and see what they have to say. Polly, welcome to the live stream.
Hello there.
Hi.
I'm kind of new to this. I was just listening to you guys on Facebook, and you said click on this so you can be a part of it. So I just didn't realize that I was going to actually be on. So, but I do work in a public school, so I do care about what's in the curriculum, and I go into different classrooms and I actually see the different types of things that kids are doing. So I feel very passionate about this subject.
In particular, are you familiar with this book, Speak by Lori Howells Anderson?
I missed the beginning of your live stream, so I didn't catch the book. I just knew that there was a concern about a book. So I'm just kind of basically here to listen. I also am running for state representative. So.
Oh, okay. What district?
35B in Coon Rapids.
Oh, okay. So not too far away.
Yeah.
All right. Well, definitely appreciate you joining us, Polly, and I'll let you listen in on the side, and I don't know if there's a way to raise your hand or somehow indicate that you want to add, but we'll check back in with you once we've dived in a little bit more onto what the issue with this book is.
Sounds
Appreciate it.
good. Thanks.
All right. So, Speak by Lori Howes Anderson. So the issue is that this is a book that contains pretty explicit descriptions of both self-harm and sexual assault. And the entire, like, it's not just incidental either. It's what the book is about. The book is about rape, and it's about a high school girl who is dealing with having endured that experience, and then dealing with the aftermath of just the kind of workaday being a high school student, trying to navigate the social maze with this trauma that she's dealt with, and the ways in which she is failed by all of the people around her, her parents, her friends, her teachers, administrators, and and I'm getting into a subjective judgment here, but it's borderline cartoonish the way some of the characters are portrayed, in terms of being stereotypes of bad parents and bad teachers and bad friends. There's not a whole lot of nuance, at least in what I've read thus far. I've got about halfway through it. I tried the best I could to get through it before doing the live stream, but it's somebody had wrote that it was like an hour and a half to read this book. I don't know how anybody's reading this book in an hour and a half. The audiobook is 6 hours. So I've been reading it.
That doesn't add up.
I checked out a copy from the library, and I've been listening to the audiobook when I've been driving around, and I'm about halfway through it. But at any rate, so there, and we can maybe get into some specific examples from the book of what these accounts are like. But the bottom line is, you're putting accounts and depictions of sexual assault in front of 15-year-old kids. And excuse me, I can approximate some of the arguments, or maybe read in the comment sections of some of the posts that I've made, some of the defenses that people have offered for why this should be in front of our kids. But I think a fair summary is that people say this is something that's happening, like sexual assault is an actual problem in this age group. And so because it's happening to some girls, it's something that we should be spending significant amounts of time in the classroom talking about and dealing with. And that's a premise that I vehemently disagree with. I don't believe that we ought to be engaged in, perhaps for lack of a better term, traumatic equity, where because some person has some group of people have dealt with a traumatic experience, we now need to drag everybody else in the room through that, and expose them to something that they would not otherwise be exposed to, and is not, it is not a common part of life for a 15-year-old kid to encounter, have to deal with, or contend with the notion of sexual assault, and that there is something good about that. When I went to the first school board meeting this month, I made a comment along the lines of, we ought to be doing what we can to preserve some measure of our children's innocence throughout their time in our care, like right up until the time they leave the door. You know, we're raising adults, as another speaker at the second board meeting this month said. We are raising our kids to become adults and have to deal with the real world. But that doesn't mean that you have to go down the checklist of all the horrors and traumas in the world and expose them to it, and wallow in it with them and dwell on it in order to prepare them to do that. You provide them with a moral framework for dealing with their world and with their community and with each other. And then they extrapolate from that moral framework how they ought to behave in different given situations. And that covers everything, right? Like, you don't need to get down into the details of, well, this is why you should never commit genocide. This is why you should never be engaged in a heinous murder. Like, there's, you sit there and dwell on the details of, let's look through photographs of heinous murders. Let's look through
Mhm.
photographs of genocide, right? Like, no, you don't need to wallow in those experiences in order to convey the morality necessary to address the issue. What do you think, Dan?
Agreed. Now I looked into the book a little bit and I read some of it, and I can't seem to get a concise answer, and maybe I just didn't read far enough. But the thing that I came across in one of the places that I was researching is the girl in the book 13. I've read that in 2 places.
I
And
can't tell you for sure. I thought she was 15.
and because when I came across that, and then I think I came across it in another place too, just like in the synopsis of the book.
I think, you know what I think? I think the author, because the author had this experience.
Yes.
And so I think she was 13 when this happened to her.
Okay. I mean, I know that I read somewhere that the character in the book was 13. Maybe that was incorrect in the synopsis that was written about the book by whoever that was. But I guess the first thing that struck me, to your point of, I don't think we need to tell, not everyone needs to experience or hear about the horribleness of the world sometimes. And if the character in the book is truly 13, I mean, that seems a little ridiculous. Not in the sense that I'm not criticizing the character. I'm saying that, you know, required curriculum for 9th grade
Right.
to be reading
It's
about
it
a
the nature of
13-year-old.
that is so horrific. It's not the type of thing that we should be putting in front of our kids' faces.
Yes, and I mean, if if a parent suggests this to their child, that is
Mhm.
their parent's issue. That's
Right.
we're not stepping into a family's household and saying no, you shouldn't do that. But yeah, that was something that struck me as a little over the top, as far as if this character is truly 13 years old and getting raped, and that is required curriculum for it's an English class, correct?
Yes, 9th grade English.
Um yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to think back to my 9th grade English. Is there another class in 9th grade? And I'm 39 years old, so obviously things may have changed. But is there another class in 9th grade where it is more revolving around reading books instead of English, where you're, trying to learn how to just write properly and grammatically correct? Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? I mean, I feel like I don't remember. I feel like I remember. Oh, American Lit. There you go. I had an American literature course in 9th grade where we solely read books.
Right.
And then we had English, where you learned grammar and how to write properly. And I don't know if maybe today the two are, more,
I
maybe
think they're conflated. I recall, and granted, it's been 25 years, 25-year reunion this year.
Mhm.
But I recall in high school, you would read the books, and it was all integrated, right? So the
Okay.
grammar, the
Okay.
reading comprehension, all that stuff was
Sure,
integrated.
sure, sure. But yeah, I
But
guess.
I mean, we were reading Romeo and Juliet, right? Like we were reading
Mhm. To
the
Kill a
Great
Mockingbird.
Gatsby, and yeah, right. We were reading
Great, yeah,
literary
yeah,
classics.
yep.
We weren't reading a book written 20 years ago about sexual assault.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what the academic value is in reading a book like this, as opposed to one of those, and it's not a question of modern versus classic. Certainly you can read modern literature or teach modern literature, but
Mhm.
as I peruse this book, I'm not seeing the academic literary English class value of what I'm reading. I mean, so
Yeah,
I
agreed,
want to.
actually. I was noticing in, I mean, I've probably read, I don't know, 20, 25 pages of it, and surrounding the event in the book that obviously is spawning this whole debate. Um,
Right.
and nothing about the writing screams to me this this is a literary masterpiece. Like,
No.
there's uh and not to say that other and yeah, I mean, not to say that that every book you read has to be complete 100% spot on, grammatically correct. I mean, the most successful writers, John Grisham, people like that, obviously aren't 100% flawless in their writing. But yeah, it seems to me that the point of a ninth grade English class should focus more on the fundamentals. And like I said earlier, is there something better than something like this to require?
Yeah, well, and so I think there are two questions, and I'm trying to bring up because there's folks who are just joining us who don't even know what book we're talking about. So I'm trying to highlight that. The book is called Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. And I'm trying to get some information put up on the screen here for you to look at. Um, but I think it raises a couple of questions, right? So there's your Wikipedia post on it. One, is there any circumstance and any justification, rationalization for placing depictions of sexual assault and having discussions? I mean, I've got a list of discussion questions I want to go through here before we're done today, this morning, to give you a sense of how this is being discussed in the classroom. Is it appropriate to even be talking about this or placing this in front of 15-year-old eyes at all, this topic and this discussion and these depictions? That's question number one. And then question number two is, from an academic perspective, why this book? Like, what is this book doing that is contributing to the academic development of our students?
Hmm.
And to that point, as I was reading it, I want to try to I want to try to be respectful in terms of how I articulate this, but I was borderline offended by how bad it was. I guess I'm not going to be able to avoid being offensive about it. Um, it's just not well written at all. And the only defense that could think of as I was reading it for why it seemed as bad as it was that the author, like, perhaps this author is in fact a genius, because apparently it's supposed to be written in the form of the diary of a 15-year-old girl, or 13, or however old the character is. And if that is in fact what the author was going for, then she nailed it, because this is exactly what I would expect a 15-year-old girl's diary to sound like and read like. Um,
It kind of
Random.
reads like, well, yeah, I suppose diary, but like an inner dialogue, like the inner
Yeah,
monologue of what's going on and how she's describing an event, and
right.
how she's just describing everyday life in high school.
Well,
Like,
and her the focus of what she's describing flits from this to that, and it's very random, and it's like reading through an uncurated diary. And what I mean by that, there's kind of an ironic component to this, because at one point in the book, she goes to the library and she checks out Dracula by Bram
hmm
Stoker.
hmm
And I kind of paused when I got to that, and I'm like, is the author trying to be meta here right now? Because written as a curation of journal entries and diaries, right? Like, each of the characters is keeping a journal or keeping a diary, and each chapter is an excerpt from their journal. But the difference is that as you read Dracula, it's all structured in a narrative form in order to tell a story about what is happening and about who the characters are and what the setting is. And it all fits together, and you can see kind of the through line as you move from one person's description. It's not like random stuff about how Jonathan Harker went to the general goods store today and he saw a guy who looked at him weird and he felt bad about it, right? Like it's not random irrelevancies. It's
Mhm.
stuff that is specific to the developing narrative and serves the purpose of telling the story. And I don't see that with Speak. What I see with Speak is like I just turned to a random page in a girl's diary and started reading.
Mhm.
And there isn't like there obviously there are components, there are characters, there are through lines, but they're not woven together in a particularly um, seemingly competent fashion. And so if the purpose of teaching a book in a high school setting is to provide students with an academic experience, why are you choosing a book that's not particularly good? Like objectively, it's not particularly good. It doesn't do what a narrative story is supposed to do.
Mhm.
That's a question that I have. All right, let's go through let's start with some of the comments so far and questions that I'm seeing in chat. I don't see anybody else having joined. By the way, like we said at the start, I'll highlight this again. If you're interested in joining this conversation, here's the URL. It's up on the screen right now. If you're watching this live, you can type that into your browser and you'll pop up your pretty face right next to mine and Dan's. And we can sit here and discuss this. You can share your perspective. And I'm particularly interested. We're not going to bite. We're not going to scream and yell at you. If you disagree with us, if you have a defense of this book, I especially want to hear from you as we have this virtual town hall on this. Going through the chat.
While you do that, I am going to put my dog's collar of justice on so she does not bark. I will be back in 2 minutes.
Collar of justice. All right. So, a question from Dan here. He asks, honest question. Lots of books have graphic depictions. What makes this one different or more egregious? Were certain teachers mandating it? Were they using it to push some kind of agenda? Okay, so lots of good, broad questions there. I think that we're going to address all of that as we go along in the next half hour to an hour or so as this continues. I do have a list of discussion questions here that have been used to teach this book in class. And I think that'll give you a sense of whether or not there's an agenda that is being pushed. The question of were certain teachers mandating it? It's not so much that the teachers are mandating it as it's part of the curriculum. So it's mandated for them to teach. So in order to remove it, it needs to get removed from the curriculum. And then lots of books have graphic depictions. What makes this one different or more egregious? I don't know that it's different or more egregious. It's the nature of what the depiction is of, and the fact that that's what the book is entirely about. It's like somebody had brought up like Lord of the Flies, and some of the depictions that take place there isn't that graphic and isn't that explicit, and surely it is, but that's not what the book is primarily about. Like it's got a larger message and narrative and story that it's trying to tell, of which that is a component. With this is about sexual assault. And as you will be able to see from the discussion questions that are asked, that's where all the focus lies. And so the question is that a topic that we should be rubbing our students' noses in at the age of 15? You know, I got a 13-year-old son. He's 2 years away. If this doesn't get out of the curriculum, and if I don't pull him out of the school, he's 2 years away from either having to read this and discuss it, which my kid, you know, he's on the autism spectrum. He has an IEP. So I don't know how that interacts with something like this, but this is a kid who looks away and gets extraordinarily uncomfortable at like characters kissing in a Hallmark movie. Okay. That's how uncomfortable he is with the topic of sex.
Yeah.
And you're going to, 2 years from now, you're going to have him reading this book and you think that's going to go well. I, as his parent, as his father, know it won't. And it's not because he's on the spectrum. I mean, that's certainly a contributing factor, but it's just his nature as a then 15-year-old kid. That's not something that I want him exposed to. It's not something that he needs to be exposed to. It doesn't do anything for him. It doesn't serve an academic purpose. He doesn't require moral instruction in why that shouldn't happen. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of odd about my perception of the argument in favor of this is what the premise seems to be. Well, we need to teach our kids not to do this, not to sexually assault each other.
Mm-hmm.
To which my response is covered, like done, like box checked. Like I don't what. First of all, if we need to do that, if it's a problem to the extent that each child needs to be sat down and go through a class about why they shouldn't be doing that, then we have broader, more systemic problems than anything that's currently being addressed, whether or not a particular book is in our curriculum. But secondarily, there are certain topics and issues that drill down to the moral values of individual households, parents, communities, churches, religious institutions of all kind. There are certain issues that don't belong in a public school because of the nature of what public school is, what it entails. It's funded through taxes, through public dollars. Its attendance is coercive. You can on a long enough timeline, if you just fail to send your kid to school, you can face civil and criminal consequences for that, right? Like you're forced to go to school. So if you're going to force something in front of people, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to force the kids to go through algebra. We're going to force the kids to learn geography. We're going to force the kids to read Shakespeare. It's another thing to say, we're going to force them to go through this experience via this book of engaging with sexual assault. That's a very long-winded answer to your question there, Dan, but there it is. Let's see, what else do we have? A comment from Lynn saying you can't unsee or unhear these accounts. Indeed. What else? So also from Pam, she's going to look into the book, but she says many books that contain pornography in our school libraries and are largely about incest, rape, and pedophilia. They have no place in our schools. In Johnson, Iowa, they have The Bluest Eye on their reading list in AP English, which is about a girl who gets raped by her father. Yeah, I would be opposing that one too. And see, I think that's part of this as well, is this isn't just about this book. It's about how does a book like this get in the curriculum? Who's making that decision? By what process? And what's their rationale? And why is it so seemingly difficult to initiate a thoughtful, meaningful, responsive review of that process and that book? And look, and it raises the question of, what other books are there? What else is being taught? One of the things that I've heard quite a bit from folks is from folks on the other side of this issue has been, well, you guys should trust us. You should trust teachers to handle these topics in the classroom. Well, I don't. And no, I shouldn't. Like, why? Why should I trust you to do that? And also, whatever trust I may have had in you has been eroded by the fact that this is in the curriculum. That's the point. Like, my trust is not a given. My trust is a product of rational evaluation of words and deeds. And so if amongst your deeds are, we want to put accounts of sexual assault in front of your 15-year-old son, and amongst your words are because we think he's bad and needs to learn that this is wrong, that's going to rationally cause me to doubt whatever trust I may have had in your ability to do your job. And so if teachers are taking offense to the notion that we might not trust them, they need to look in the mirror. Like, okay, what it's not like this came out of nowhere. This is a reaction. This is a response to what we're finding, to what we're seeing. And as the parents, we're the ones who ought to be driving the conversation. We are the deciders, to evoke that term, right? Like, we're the ones who should be deciding whether or not this is appropriate and how these topics ought to be handled in the school.
I think a lot of teachers too, who would oppose your and my viewpoint, are coming from a place of misplaced compassion. I mean, they think that these topics, or a lot of the things that are going on, especially in the public schools, are them helping helping the students to understand the world we live in. And I guess, I would, playing devil's advocate, I would say, I think there's, a lot of misplaced compassion, as in this is good for them. It's good to expose kids to A, B, C, X, Y, Z. I think that's what you're up against. That's what we're up against, is teachers, I believe, falsely believing that this is good for them.
Well, and see, that goes to the question of who gets to decide. It's perfectly fine. You're free to have the opinion that my kid should see this. My opinion is more important than yours. It just is, because I'm his dad.
Yep.
One of the things that I've heard said about this is, in fact, it was in public comment at the second school board meeting this month. The one gal who got up to defend this book basically made the case that parents suck and they're not doing their job. I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
That's not what she said.
Yeah.
And I'm putting my own spin on it. But she's like, this is a topic that parents aren't addressing with their kids. The implied premise there is that this is a topic that parents should be addressing with their kids. And that's not something that you get to decide as the parent, or as the teacher, as the administrator, as the school board member, as the anything. You don't get to decide how I ought to parent my child, and that you're going to try to make up for some deficit that you perceive in my parenting. You need to stay in your lane. That is not how this works. And so that's what's frustrating to me, is that we can have amongst adults, we can have a sincere, and we just had somebody join us. So I'm excited to get another perspective here. Oh no, I guess we didn't. I got all excited there for a second, because I thought somebody was I'm going to put that link back up here. If anybody does want to join, and literally anybody in the whole world could join us by typing this in your browser. But to me, we can have a conversation amongst adults about whether or not parents in the abstract ought to have this type of conversation with their kids. But at the end of the day, the end result of that conversation cannot be, it is not acceptable for the end result of that conversation to be, we're going to circumvent the judgment of parents as to whether or not they ought to have that conversation. And that's what by the nature of public education, what public education is and how it functions, when you put something in a curriculum that parents are showing up in droves to your school board meeting saying, we don't want, that is in effect what you are doing. You are saying, we are going to circumvent your judgment as a parent and put this in front of your kid, even though you don't want them to have it. Now, in all fairness, you can opt out of this. I don't know what that process is. Maybe somebody can join us or put in the chat what it is.
They can opt out of reading it, do you mean?
Yeah, they can opt their kid out of reading this book. What I have heard about people's experience of opting their kid out of this is that it manifests in a very socially stigmatizing and exclusionary manner. And so I don't want to put my kid through that either. Like what is the point of putting your kid through that for the sake of exposing all the other kids to this thing that has arguably no academic value, and potentially traumatizes, and I hate using the word, but triggers them, especially if they've had this experience. That's the thing, is it's justified as, oh, there are kids who've had this experience, so we need to talk about it. Do you really think that girls who have been sexually assaulted in this age range want to have a conversation about that with their classmates?
Probably not.
In a captive audience scenario? You think that's good for them? I just have a
conversation for a therapist.
Right. And the classroom is not a therapy session. That's not why it exists. All right, let's catch up on some of these comments because they've been rolling in a little bit here.
Wonderful.
Second question from Dan. Even if the book gets 86, what's to stop these teachers from just moving on to something worse? Seems like toxic teachers are the problem here. Well, hey, I
agree with that.
Maybe we have another live stream about that. Look, I do think, and I want to follow my own rule. My own rule here was, let's stay on topic. But suffice it to say, this issue does speak to the larger issue of how our education system works, and
or how it's not working.
And the fruit that it is bared. So that's a conversation for another time. Debbie says it has won multiple awards, which the latest publication showcases quite a bit with the accolades on front and back. That is true. It has won a lot of awards.
There are a lot of things that have won awards for being what awards has this book won?
Well, let's bring up that Wikipedia page. I'm sure it's got.
But if I stacked a panel full of people that agreed with me, I guarantee you I could win lots of awards just for being my awesome self.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Honors and accolades. So Speak is a New York Times bestseller. The novel received several awards and honors, including the American Library Association's 2000 Michael Prince Honor and the 2000 Golden Kite Award. It also was selected as the 2000 ALA Best Book for Young Adults. Best book for young adults.
Well, is a young adult 18 to?
An
adult
young
is
adult
18.
Young adult is preteen. Young adult
18 to 22. I mean, that's a very different story than ninth grade.
Speak gained critical acclaim for its portrayal of the trauma caused by rape. See, that's the thing right there. Let me highlight that. Speak gained critical acclaim for its enormous academic value? No. For its literary significance? No. For its portrayal of the trauma caused by rape. That's why it got awards, according to, and who knows who wrote. It's a Wikipedia thing, but I don't know that the author or publishers would dispute that.
But that's not really what we're. The question is not the awards it's won. The question is this appropriate, or is it serving any values being in the curriculum? And what I like, the New York Times bestseller. Do you know what else was a New York Times bestseller? Tucker Max's I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. That's one of the most bought books of the 2000s, and that is purely story after story of his drunken debauchery. Are we putting that in schools too, to say, well, this is what happens when you go to college and you drink a lot? I mean, the New York Times bestseller list has lots of things that are not literary, it's not, that doesn't have much value in a school.
So going back to the question of opting out of this or what the process is like, or Dan had asked about whether or not teachers were imposing this. So I've gotten a couple of texts from one of the parents who's part of this group of concerned moms. Mostly, it is mostly moms who are concerned about this. She says that 6 years ago, well, first of all, she says teachers do have a say in the books they choose, and they choose this book. And she says 6 years ago, 15 plus parents went to the principal and teachers and had a meeting, drafted letters. I presume she's talking about at STMA high school. They met us to suffice our concerns and continued on with the book. My son's class, I was never notified. The article Enduring the Memory of a Rape, which I think I have here, it was provided in this stack from this same mother, was brought into the class and they read it aloud. So that, again, that goes to the point of that's what this is about. This is not a book where a sexual assault occurs. This is a book about sexual assault, where the discussion that goes along with it is focused on sexual assault. That's the point. And so why are we doing that with 15-year-old boys and girls?
Let me know if you want me to get into my favorite book of all time that belongs nowhere near a school, and I believe has way more significance to society at large than quite possibly this book.
So another comment here from Pam regarding the legislative ask for protection for this sort of thing. Gary says, imagine hating your children so much that you send them to public school. Good old Gary.
That's
can always
funny.
count on him.
That's funny.
Pam asks, it's impossible to get these books out of schools in Iowa. We have reconsiderations you have to go through to object to a book. Several parents have attempted to remove genderqueer in our schools, and only 2 schools removed the book. Genderqueer is a graphic novel showing vivid sexual acts. I believe it.
Yeah, that's along with the lawn boy genderqueer, where there's, I mean, men having sex with boys, and it's hey, at least we're not trying to remove that one from St. Michael. But maybe one day.
Well, do I even want to find out?
No.
Do I even want to look to see if it's there? I mean, I don't know if I can handle that much. I don't know if I could remain as calm as I've tried to be throughout this discussion, if that's what we were talking about.
Yep.
Lynn says, does the district allow for informed consent on controversial books? My oldest is in 6th grade, and my children will not be entering STMA until they are in 9th grade, so I'm not familiar with the protocol. Informed consent. So I'm guessing the answer, I don't know the answer, but I'm guessing the answer is no. Based upon what I'm hearing.
It's a controversial book either, if it's there.
Right. So in other words, nobody's coming to you and saying, hey, we want to show this to your kid. Is that okay? That's what informed consent is, as far as I understand the concept. And that's not happening. They're putting this in. You can opt out of it, but and then you're going to have the exclusionary process, socially stigmatizing process of your kid being put in a corner or taken to another room or something while the rest of the kids talk about it. And also, even if you go that route of your kid is segregated and reads something else, all of his friends and classmates and cohort are still reading this, and they're still having a discussion about it in class. You don't think that's going to bubble out into the lunchroom, the hallways, the after school? Like, this is you're not truly opting your kid out by not having them read this book, because the communal experience, which of course is the point, that's why they want to do this, is to have this communal conversation about it. That communal conversation is still going to be happening, and it's not going to be contained to the confines of the classroom. Let's see. Seems like there's some argument happening about public school in the comments section. So we'll keep things on
Stay on
on
topic,
track.
people.
Yeah. All right. So, what have we covered? We've covered what the book is. We've covered a little bit of the history, in that there was a group of parents who tried to get this removed before without success. We've talked a little bit about the status quo, the current state of things, that parents have shown up. And by the way, just to correct the record or clear the air, there may be the perception out there, based upon the fact that here I am having a live stream about it, and I showed up to 2 school board meetings and was the first one to speak about this at those meetings, that this is something that I'm leading and at the forefront of. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is 100% grassroots moms, mama bears getting together and getting this done. It was brought to my attention by a mom who is herself in contact with a bunch of other moms, and it's all informal, and they are and frankly, this last time I went to the school board, I had no idea whether or not there's going to be anybody else there to talk about this. For all I knew, I was going to walk in there and be the only person to have anything to say about it, and that was going to be it. But turns out, no, there were plenty of other people there who were there for this reason, and 4 people got to speak, including myself.
And nobody's mic got turned off accidentally.
Whose mic got turned off?
No, and nobody's mic got turned off accidentally.
No. Let me say, yeah, it's worth saying. A couple of things that are very much worth saying, and I wish I would have said earlier in this stream. The school board has been professional,
Wonderful.
respectful.
Good.
They have their rules.
Mm-hmm.
You may or may not agree with those rules about open comment.
Mm-hmm.
You may or may not agree with the policy of not directly addressing or having any sort of discussion regarding the things that are brought up in open comment. But the rules are what they are, and they have administered them fairly. And in addition to that, I have seen nothing but professionalism from the superintendent, from Anne Marie, from school staff. Even my dealings with teachers who disagree with me on this online, there might be some sharp comments, but I've had some sharp comments, so I can't complain. So I mean, and in fact, the Drew, the chair, or I don't know what they call him. Is he the chair of the school board? I think that's correct.
Chairwoman.
Yeah.
Chairman.
He even made a point of saying at this last school board meeting that it's remarkable and a point of pride that this type of conversation can proceed respectfully. And thus far it has. So I do want to say that. That said, having a nice, polite, respectful conversation is not the end goal here. Like the end goal here is to have our concern addressed satisfactorily. And to my mind, that means removing the book from the curriculum.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the state of things, and so now we can kind of pivot. We're hitting the hour mark here in a couple minutes. So let's pivot to talking about the direction things are going and kind of next steps. There's been talk of a petition. I don't know that anybody has actually put it together as of yet. Like I said, I'm not leading this, so I'm not the one to ask. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see some petition action in the near future on this topic. I have heard that there's a committee that has been formed, or that's in the process of being formed by the school district to address this question. In my experience, committees are where controversial things go to die. So I don't know. We'll see what comes out of that. Again, I think the satisfactory resolution to this is getting the book removed, and anything short of that is not satisfactory. So I don't know if that's what'll come out of this committee. But it really comes down to, and the reason why we're doing this today, it really comes down to parents, and keeping up the pressure. If you think everything's a-okay and this is no big deal, and you're fine with your 15-year-old and other 15-year-olds in the community, with the support of your tax dollars, having graphic depictions of sexual assault put in front of their faces and then spending time in classroom talking about it, then I guess there's nothing to see here. But if you do have a problem with that, then you need to make your voice heard. And that's why I'm doing this, is to get it out there, raise awareness that this is something that's happening. Because I think a lot of people don't know, and because they do trust the teachers, and they do trust the process, and they trust their elected school board members, that we have this implicit trust in our public officials, our public servants, our teachers, the folks who we entrust with the care of our children. And so we assume, based upon that implicit trust, that they're not going to do something that's counter to the interests of our child.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see something like this and you realize, ooh, I guess they will. And so people need to have that moment of, at the very least, asking themselves the question of, is this something that I want my kid to be part of? All right, so let's go over some of the discussion questions here. I don't have these to put up in front of people, unfortunately, but I can read them to you. So there's an essay by Emily Yellen called "Waking Up to the Enduring Memory of Rape," and that's also put in front of kids in the classroom. So they get to read about, that's a nonfiction account. And so they get to be exposed to that and dwell on it. And then these are some of the discussion questions that are asked in class. Melinda, that's the main character of the book Speak that we've been talking about. Melinda asks, was I raped? From the short excerpt here, can you determine an answer to that question? What's the definition of rape? If you have read the entire novel, how would you answer Melinda's question?
And this is an English class.
This is a 9th grade English class in front of your 15-year-old kid. They're being asked that.
I don't see the relevance of that in an English class.
What parallels do you see between these two excerpts? One is fiction, the other nonfiction. But what did the women, their circumstances, their reactions, and the reactions of others have in common? So compare and contrast the fictional and non-fictional depiction of sexual assault. 15-year-old. In Waking Up to the Enduring Memory of a Rape, Emily Yellen writes, I feel frustrated and marginalized when I see how out of touch and ignorant our culture is about what rape really is and its effects. In what ways does she show society's difficulty in understanding rape in her essay? What solutions does she offer? So we're turning to our 15-year-olds and asking them to come up with solutions to sexual assault. These are kids who can't drive a car. Okay.
Yeah. And devil's advocate, though, it's the people saying, well, they need to be prepared for this.
Yeah. I don't know. They need to be insulated from it, right? It needs to not happen to them, and it needs to be. So we'll get to that, because the whole solutions part of this conversation is something that needs to be talked about, not by 15-year-olds, but by us grown-ups. Okay.
Yeah.
According to Emily Yellen, for every documented rape case, I know there are hundreds more like mine that remain off the record. Using information from RAIN, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, an organization, regarding campus safety, is there evidence that this is true? If so, what should we as a society do? Again, you're turning to 15-year-olds and asking them what society should do about rape. There are some people who think that Speak should not be read by young adults or taught in high school classes. They feel that the themes, including sexual assault, depression, and peer pressure, are not appropriate for students to read about. In fact, in 2010, a Missouri State University professor named Wesley Scroggins called Speak soft pornography and argued that the book should be banned in public schools. Do you think that Speak should be read in school? Why or why not? So now we're asking the kids whether or not what they think their own curriculum should be. Speak was written in 1999, and Emily Yellen wrote her essay in 2013. In 2014, President Obama released the names of 55 colleges and universities under investigation for their handling of sexual assault complaints and established a website for victims. In the last 15 years, do you think our society has begun to wake up to confront rape fully and to do whatever we have to do to stop it? How would you answer our key question above? What do young people need to know about sexual assault, its effects, and why? So again, the broad questions of what society ought to do in order to stop it, we're putting in front of 15-year-olds. Now, we could have a conversation about whether or not we ought to include our 15-year-old children in that conversation of what institutions and what society ought to do. I think you know how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm interested in is kind of like an addendum to all of this is what's our, like, as grown-ups, as adults, what are our answers to these questions? Because I have a feeling, certainly within the context of public school, that there's an entire category of answers to these questions that cannot be openly discussed in the classroom, because this is a moral issue that has to do with moral values that are filtered through a moral framework and worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And that touches upon religion. What do you believe about the world in which you live? What do you believe about its origins and its nature and the nature of the people who live in it, the nature of yourself, why you ought to treat people the way that you do, why you ought to hold the beliefs that you hold? That conversation, you cannot have a good faith, truly open and honest deliberation about questions at that level without including or at least intruding upon religious worldview. But I can't come into the classroom, my son can't walk into his 9th grade classroom and say, well, God says, or scripture reads, or I believe this because it's taught in my church. He can't say that, because the moment he does any of that, we don't deal with that here. We don't deal with issues of worldview and religion, and that's personal. That's personal, right? Like that's for you and your family. But we'll talk about sexual assault outside of all of that context, excluding that entire defining aspect of your identity, right? We're gonna as folks are wont to say, we're going to erase that aspect of you, and then ask you to encounter this extraordinarily challenging topic without any of that baggage. It's certainly not fair. I think that's the least thing you can say about it, is that it's not fair. It's also impossible. I can't have a conversation about sexual morality without bringing in my religious worldview. And you don't have to agree with my religious worldview, but we can't have a conversation about a moral issue of that magnitude that excludes it. And that's what you're asking these kids to do. And it's also what we're being asked to do as adults at the public policy level. to somehow come up. It's what we're trying to do, it seems, is we're trying to reinvent the wheel, reinvent the moral wheel. So we've taken away, we've declared as patriarchal and damaging and oppressive
Mm-hmm.
all of the answers to this question: marriage, family, um, morality, biblical
Mm-hmm.
morality. We've declared all of those things oppressive and patriarchal and inappropriate to be supported by public institutions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you've removed all of the structure which solved this problem in the past. And now there's no structure. And now you're saying we need to just accept willy-nilly anything that anybody wants to do or say or declare, or any behavior they want to engage in. But then when it crosses this murky line of what you arbitrarily define as consent, which you've placed us in a position which we have very little way of even defining what that means, because you've removed all the guardrails that we used to impose. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to do something. Like, I want to know what their answer to these questions is. What is it that we're supposed to be doing? Because the answer seems to be take our 15-year-old kids and have prolonged conversations with them about sexual assault. My answer is we ought to be providing consequences, criminal consequences for rapists
Mm-hmm.
that are so harsh that no one would dare do it.
Yeah.
That's part of the solution. Another part of the solution is not. So one of the common themes that pops up again and again in these narratives of this happening is young kids at alcohol fueled parties unsupervised.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell is that happening? Honest question. How the hell is that happening? Where are the parents? Where are the homeowners?
Parents thinking that it's because I grew up in Edina. This was the acronym for Edina. The joking acronym was "Every day I need alcohol," and there were a lot of parents that felt it was safer to have it happen at home than to be out driving. And I would not be surprised if that was kind of the thought process, or that is still, I'm guessing that's still the thought process of a lot of parents, thinking that, well, you know what, it's going to happen anyways. I would rather everyone do it here, and I will make sure it's done safely than out and about.
Right. So I would add to my prescription that there need to be harsher consequences for that.
Yeah.
If you're providing alcohol to minors, you're facilitating an environment where this sort of thing takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are we putting this on our 15-year-olds? Why are we putting it on the kids to figure out, when there are solutions that we could be imposing on ourselves as parents, as legislators, as members of the community, as a body politic? There are things we could be doing to provide a safer environment for our kids and to clean up our streets and to punish criminals, which would have the effect of stopping this. That's what you say you want to do. You want to stop this from happening to people. Okay, let's stop it. Why are you putting it in front of 15-year-olds and making it their thing, their problem to figure out? You need to introspectively, as a 15-year-old boy, figure out how you're going to stop this from happening. That's ludicrous.
Yeah. Again, yeah, I'd say it's the misplaced idea that we're helping them grow up. We're helping them realize, what the world is all about, when it surely seems like maybe you should just be in an English class helping them read and write proficiently.
We got, as I continue to go down the comment list here, Sonia Buckmeyer from Minnesota State Representative saying, seems like Gary Miller is the classic pot stirrer that can offer only his perspective and not see beyond it. Gary is one of our other commenters. I think he was the one who was going hard after public education.
Oh, sure.
I prefer to raise kids that have an understanding and empathy for others and are equipped to operate in diverse, changing world. So I don't know if I'm seeing the full thread of how these comments are interacting, but assuming that she's talking about public education as the mechanism for how to raise kids that have an understanding and empathy for others, and are equipped to operate in a diverse, changing world. I don't know that, because there are choices, limited though they may be, that parents have in terms of how to educate their children. I don't know that public education is the mechanism through which kids develop empathy, and the ability to function in society. That's kind of an odd premise to put forward. But in addition to that, on this topic of, therefore, we need to put depictions of sexual assault in front of their face. I mean, I don't know if that was the implication she intended or not, but just doesn't seem. And by the way, she can join us. Let me put that up again. There's the link. Anybody can. Everybody's shy this morning, or maybe it's just because it's Saturday morning. Nobody's joined us. We did have Polly join us for very briefly, which was good to hear from somebody. Continuing down the chat rabbit hole here. Let's see. Solid points. You're making a lot of sense. Well, that's nice. Thank you. Like what you're saying about adult responsibilities being pushed on kids. It does seem pretty toxic. Yeah. I mean, my wife and I we'll be having conversations about like kitchen table economics, and our 9-year-old will wander in and, listening to us talk, start asking questions, and we'll change the topic because he doesn't need to be thinking about that, right? Like, he doesn't need to be thinking about how the bills are getting paid. Now, is the intention to raise him to where obviously he gets to the point where he's an adult and he's capable of paying his bills? Of course. But he doesn't need to be dragged along. Like, he can preserve some measure of being allowed to be a kid. Call it innocence, call it just enjoying your youth. He should be allowed that.
The push to make kids grow up as soon as possible. And I mean, obviously there's value in having children understand the world, but I agree. This push to make kids grow up, be 18 when they're 12 and 9, it seems completely destructive to the natural evolution of how a child's brain grows.
Well, I was really hoping that we would get a little bit more of pushback, some devil's advocacy, for lack of a better term.
I think those are called keyboard warriors.
Well, yeah, that's just
hide
it. Like,
anonymously behind your keyboard and not show your face.
But when you have these conversations in a Facebook post or on Twitter or wherever, people are very ready to. Oh, somebody joined. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you this morning.
Thanks so much. I'm going to be one of those that has a differing opinion.
Awesome.
So I love what I appreciate the bringing this up, because I do think this is a topic that's worth having a conversation around. But my Question for you more now is help me understand what the solution to this problem is. So you've brought up the fact that the book is not something that you necessarily agree upon, that this is something that you feel needs to be changed. You've gone to a couple school board meetings, you've had some conversation, you're having a live forum. Help me understand what the solution to change is, because we can have this conversation all day, every day, and we can all agree that public school is crap, and we can do all this slinging on Facebook as we've seen in the comments below. But what is the solution to change? What is the ultimate goal here? Because this book has been in publication in part of the curriculum for years. My children both graduated, and I have a senior and I have a daughter that graduated from STMA. This is not a new book. This is not new curriculum that has been discussed. This is not a new conversation that has happened. So one, my question is, why now? Why are we having this conversation today versus, this has been in publication, like I said, for, 5, 10 years, maybe. Two, what is your solution to this versus just having conversation about how we should be, banning books?
Okay. So, got two questions out of that. The first question was why now?
Yep.
Indeed, the book has been around for quite a while. It was written in 1999, a couple years after I graduated. It's been taught in schools. It's received all kinds of rewards and accolades. It is not new. Why now? For me, it's new to me. It's a book that has not been a part of my life, has not had any impact on me, has not been in my orbit or had any effect upon my family until just now, because it was just brought to my attention by this group of concerned mothers who would like to see it removed from the curriculum. And the other relevance is that I have a son who's 13. He's in the district. He's on track to, unless this is removed, either have to read it in a couple of years, or if we opt him out of it and keep him in public school, face an experience that could be socially stigmatizing and ostracizing in terms of being taken out, put in a corner, put in another room to read something else. So why now is because it's proximate and it's urgent to me personally, because it affects my kid right now. So that's the answer to that question. I think also in addressing why now, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that there's like a 3-year cycle of deciding what is going to be in curriculum. And 6 years ago, there was an attempt to try to get ahead of this and get the book removed that was unsuccessful. And one of the ways that they kind of justify not addressing it is by saying, well, it's not time to look at it. Well, this happens to be one of the times to look at it, because they're in the process of this window of being able to deliberate whether or not things ought to be in the curriculum or not. The second question, what's my solution to this? So in order to answer what's my solution to this, we have to, a little bit of echoing there. We have to define this. Like, what is the this that we're trying to find a solution to? Sexual assault?
I think that the solution that you're trying to define is whether this book is allowed or should be allowed based on your personal opinion, and whether you think that this is something that should be in the school district. The argument could be made on the flip side that, there are a lot of students that have gone through this, have read the book and come out on the other side just fine, right? But because it's impacting your particular person right now, your particular student, your particular child, that somehow we should all be on the same page with that, right? Where I think the conversation should be more around, if there are reasons to change curriculum collectively as a society and collectively as members of the STMA group, we need to come up with proactive solutions that actually make a difference in the collective conversation versus this is impacting my kid now. So now I'm worried about it now, when this has been something that's been going on for years, and it feels a little political. I have to just be totally honest that now this is coming up when you're running. And I think that it is something that is scary to me, that this is being used and leveraged by that particular side for conversation, when this is not a new book in our school districts. This is not something that is just now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we've got this big, huge problem. Curriculum has been an opportunity and has been a challenge in the STMA school district for a long time. This is not a new thing. And if we have challenges, we need something to be changed. I'd like to understand how you collectively, as a parent, as a representative, and as someone who is voicing your opinion, how you agree to make this something collectively that we can change, not just about one book because of now, right? Like, how does this move forward?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I'm trying to formulate or essentialize what you're saying. You're right in identifying that there is a broader issue here than just this book.
Correct.
Very much so, in multiple ways.
Agreed.
In terms of how we address the issue of sexual assault as a community, whether or not we include our children, our 15-year-olds in that conversation, and then just how we approach the task of educating overall. Very, very big topic that I think is going to go beyond the scope of our live stream today. But certainly that is part of where this points to, right? Is that when you have a tension between what parents want their kids' academic experience to be and just their experience of growing up to be, and what is being imposed on them through the force of the state via the public education system, that is something that does need to be addressed. The whole question of, why do this now when it's most relevant to my child, my student, my son? Well, because he's my child, he's my student, he's my son. Of course, I'm going to care about something that affects him directly and imminently. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything unusual about that.
No, there's no debate about whether you should have a care about whether your child reads and what they don't read. My question, as I'm asking it to you, is what is your solution for diverse thinking in curriculum in the school system? So if this is not the right book to have, in your opinion, this is not the right book that we should be sharing, then what is the solution for diverse thinking in curriculum in STMA versus saying this book should be banned? Like, my understanding of the teachers at STMA is that most of them have their master's degree in education, right? We are not, just hiring some, these are critical thinking teachers who are well educated. If we don't collectively as parents agree with the curriculum, my question to you is, this has nothing to do with this particular topic. It's a bigger, broader question around what is the solution to diverse curriculum so that our students are making or have the ability to deal with and understand different viewpoints in the world or different topics in the world? And how do we collectively as parents make a decision and help move forward change versus pulling out one element to this and having a conversation? This is a much bigger, broader conversation to have around curriculum. And that's my question to you, is how do we collectively, or what are your thoughts and solutions on how we collectively have that element of diverse thinking and have the element of creating curriculum that provides that level while still, having the ability as parents to feel comfortable with what's being, taught in their schools?
I guess I'm having difficulty drawing the connection between a consideration of this particular book, but also the idea of placing detailed accounts of sexual assault in front of our kids, I'm having trouble connecting that to the idea of diverse thinking. Certainly, there is no shortage of diverse perspectives and diverse thinking presented in the high school curriculum, in any curriculum. I think one of the tripwires, one of the fuses, if you want to look at a couple of analogies, for determining whether or not it crosses a line of appropriateness is when you have a significant number of people in your community up in arms, for lack of a better term, coming to policymakers and decision makers and saying, hard no, this is not something I want in front of my kid. There's I don't know that, because you had asked earlier, what alternative would you have? Or why not this book, or something along those lines. Or it had to do with like the me imposing, or concerned parents imposing our objection upon the rest of the students. Why shouldn't the rest of the students be able to have this experience just because I object to it? And I guess my answer to that is, I don't see what the rest of the students are missing by not reading this book.
I agree. The book is not the question. So let's just assume that we are going to agree to disagree, or whatever the thoughts are on the book. Okay. My question to you though is, what is the solution for change? How do you recommend changing the curriculum for different viewpoints? So if we agree that, okay, let's say you've made that clear, you do not agree that this is the right book that your child or any other child should be reading. Point taken. Okay. So I think we've hashed for an hour and a half that is, the point. So my question to you, however, is, what is the solution for change? What is the solution to make a different book, or to have a different person think, or a different set of curriculum in the school district? What's the solution? How do we make that difference? How do we make that change as parents?
You need to define the change you're talking about, because
if this isn't a book, then there's going to be another book that's going to come up, right? So there'll be another book, then there's going to be another book that somebody else doesn't agree with, and then there's something else, and then there's going to be something else. So how do we have a voice in what's being taught to our students? How do we do that?
I think there's already standards in place that this book arguably violates. You steer clear of inappropriate material for the age group. You can pick literally any other book as long as it doesn't have depictions of sexual assault and it's all about sexual assault. And we're going to have hour-long conversations where we go through all these discussion questions, putting the public policy issue of what society ought to do about sexual assault in front of 15-year-olds. It's not, I don't think it's as difficult as your question seems to suggest it is. It's a pretty low bar and simple standard, in my view, of you can have any other type of curriculum you want with whatever type of viewpoint you want the kids to consider as part of their academic pursuit, so long as it doesn't cross this line of inappropriateness. I don't think that that's a novel concept.
Well, I think we need to be really mindful of what is considered inappropriate and what's not considered inappropriate. This book has been taught in STMA for 10 years. So it is not currently, like I said, this is not new. This is not something that has just come to. And yes, I agree that everybody has their opinion as a parent to decide whether or not, you want to have this taught or you don't. But again, I'm not hearing solutions for change. So how do we all go to the school board and oppose this? Do we vote the right people in? Do we say,
oh, okay, I understand you now.
What's the solution? What is your recommendation for change? Because I think we're going to have, all of us are going to agree to disagree on what we think is appropriate. Depending on which side of the aisle you fall on, it's going to seem very different. But what, as parents, instead of bashing kids and bashing people about whether or not we agree with the public school system, we live here. Our kids go to school here. So what's the solution for change? That's my question to you.
Okay. Now, I think I understand the question now in a way that I didn't before. So it sounds like you're talking about process of how we engage.
Correct.
And yeah, there's definitely a deficit there, which is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing here. Is that yes, you can go to the school board. We have, maybe you can be lucky enough to be placed on whatever committee is going to look at this and have input there. But what's not going to happen is there's not going to be this open deliberation like we're having now that everybody can take a look at and weigh the points through the filter of their own judgment and make a decision as to where they stand on it, and then have some feedback. Like, there's not the public deliberation process. And there is something wrong with our current processes at a variety of levels in government, that it's been structured in such a way as to literally prevent that from happening. Like, prevent people from being able to have the type of conversation that you and I are having right now, where it's point, counterpoint. Here are the merits. Here's my argument. Everything has been very essentialized, and it's been very limited and stifled, I think is a good word. Where, I go to the school board, I got 3 minutes. We're going to limit it to 4 people per side of an issue. And so give me your snack size version of your entire point and concern and a snapshot of what the issue is. And as Drew said at the first meeting, all right, we got the gist of it. And I get it. I understand. I'm not trying to throw Drew under the bus. Yes, there are limitations to what can be achieved in the context of a school board meeting, but I need you to do more than just get the gist of it, right? Like, there needs to be a mechanism to get past the gist to the core, to the heart of it, and address the real issue that people have and the concern that people have. And you're right, assuming that this is what you're implying, that those processes don't seem to currently exist. And so, and I don't want to, you say this seems political because I'm running for state representative. I can see that. Not gonna argue that the timing is what it is.
Right.
However, I have attempted, certainly today in the context of this, to try to compartmentalize this conversation from that conversation of whether or not I ought to be the state representative. Because for me, this genuinely is about, I'm a parent in the district. I'm a taxpayer of the district. I care about my kid and his cohort, and the things that they're exposed to. But the fact of the matter remains, indeed, the solution to the problem that you're talking about, how do we pursue change? That is a legislative thing. And it is going to require fundamentally changing the structure of how these institutions work. And as anybody who has followed what I've had to say on the topic of education knows, I'm a proponent of school choice. I'm a proponent of educational choice. I think parents ought to be the final arbiters in how their children are educated. And by making it a market, in the sense of, if I don't like what's happening with my kid, I can, without any resistance or veto, get them into a situation that I do agree with. I can take them out of this school and put them in that one. That's a process that solves this problem, because then the parents who are totally fine with their kids being exposed to this and reading this and think it's wonderful, and it's been in the school for 10 years, and so it's awesome, they can leave their kids where they're at and they can all go through this. Whereas those of us who have issues with it can take our money, take our dollars, and go somewhere else. I think that is a process solution to this problem. But until we get there, we're not there. We don't have that as policy in Minnesota. What we're left with is the school board, whatever committee is going to decide what's in the curriculum, the teachers themselves. And so the processes that are available to us to affect change are right here. This, raising awareness, getting the word out, starting a conversation, seeing if anybody agrees with you, and trying to get them to say their piece to the people who are making the decisions that affect our kids.
I just have, thank you for that. I appreciate you taking the time to answer that question. I have one final question, and then I'd love to hear all of the people who have comments about this comment jump on and voice their opinions. But I'm wondering if you've had any conversation with any of the teachers directly. I know that they, take careful consideration of the books and the learning goals that are set forth by the state. And I'm curious how the lack of support, or if there's been conversation around that with the teachers and some of the changes and things that have been happening at the high school specifically because of feeling lack of support. Have you had any conversation with any of the teachers directly and their thoughts around this or any of that? And what are their viewpoints?
No, I have not. And I certainly don't preclude, I would love to have those conversations. The way this process has played out is I was drawn into this by the group of concerned parents who wanted to approach the school board about it, like right before the school board meeting, like within a couple of days. And so it was already at the school board level. And while I personally have not had those conversations with parents, many of these with teachers, many of these parents have. And there seems to be, and perhaps I'm wrong, but there seems to be this kind of cycle of passing the buck, to be crude about it, where you talk to the teacher and the teacher says, well, you need to go talk to this person over here who handles curriculum. And you go talk to that person and they're like, well, that's really a policy matter. You need to go talk to the school board. And you talk to the school board and they say, well, we got mandates from the state, and round you go. And nobody really seems to want to take responsibility for this. They wanted to pass it on to the next person or the next group, the next committee, and say, that's the person you need to talk to. And so I think part of the reason why the focus is on the school board right now is twofold. One, they are in, and this goes back to your question of timing, of like, why now? As I'm sure you're aware, the school board is considering and likely to pursue another ask to the voters for an operational levy this November. So that's relevant, right? You're coming to me saying you want more of my money in order to fund your operation, while we have this disagreement regarding what you're doing with that money that affects my child.
Right.
And so that raises that time consideration, raises the sense of urgency around something getting done sooner than later, so that when we go to make that vote as residents regarding whether or not we support that levy, we're doing so with knowledge of how they're going to address this concern. And so that makes it political in a way that's unavoidable. I mean, all of this is political because of the nature of what we're doing. Public education is political. It is. That's part of the problem with it, in my view. It's a public institution, and so it's going to be political. And so anyway, I think I might be losing track of what your original question was.
No, I asked if you had talked to any of the teachers specifically about this.
So that's part of why I have to this point circumvented talking to individual teachers, because the conversation is taking place at a higher level than that at this moment. But I certainly welcome and would love to pursue conversations with teachers, because I want to know where their heads at with this. What are they thinking? What do they think the academic value is? How would they respond to what we've said here today in terms of the academic value?
Agreed. And I don't begin to know or to speak on behalf of the teachers in our district, but I would love to hear that opinion as well. And I would like to know, from those people who are actually sitting there making those decisions every day, what their thought process is, why this has been decided this way, and I'd love some a differing viewpoint as to why this is a good book to have in our schools, and why this was a choice, and why it has been in for 10 years. So I think there's some good conversation to be had around that. So I appreciate you taking my question and letting me jump on. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I encourage anybody who is in the chat who likes to sling, words, come on and say something live, and let's have a valid conversation where we're all adults and we can really discuss this as people who are concerned citizens on either side of this conversation, and really help be the change that we want to see for our children and for our community. And that I encourage you to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate very much you coming on and being willing to put yourself out there. Appreciate it, Dawn.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, that's awesome. That made my day right there.
That was great.
That's exactly what I was hoping we would have. Is
we didn't really find out if maybe she'll come back on. We didn't really find out what she thought of it, if she thought that it was needed.
I mean, I'm more interested in what we did talk about than that. Right? Okay. So this
is your town hall. So if you're happy, then I'm happy.
Well, I mean, it is, and it is, like, I'm putting it on. But my hope is that everybody who's listened and commented and participated feels a sense of ownership over it. What I mean to say is that, the questions she was asking are the larger questions. Then, because that's the thing, is this isn't just about this book. It's not. The thing she implied but didn't say is that, okay, Walter, let's say you win and get this book removed from the curriculum. What then? Like, is that it? Game over? Like, you've have this achievement and you get to walk away into the sunset? And the answer is, of course, no. This is indicative of a larger problem, and perhaps multiple larger problems that we need to have broader solutions for. Solutions that, as our conversation indicated, go beyond. So
something that, in regards to the larger picture, and I didn't want to, that was meant for you and her to be discussing, but something popped into my mind about the larger picture. And as far as a solution goes, if you kind of like we talked about earlier, what ninth grade was like for us. I graduated high school 21 years ago. You just a hair before me. And if you look at basically how the public schools and high school was preparing you for life after high school back then, as opposed to now, I don't think it's even, I think the two worlds, that's just two different universes. And I think then that made me think of, to the larger picture, and I know this is more revolving around this specific book, but what is this book or the next book after it, or any of these types of books, actually doing for the public school and for these English classes, as far as going, like, what is, and I can't think of the word, what is the significance? What is the, what's the word I'm looking for? Why is
I'm not sure. I think I know what you're saying, but
is this book and others like it? Like, why are they there? How are they helping? And
and that's sure. And that's, to go back to her. She had a lot of great comments that could have taken us in 50 different directions.
Totally.
And one of them, she was talking about, my personal concern about my kid versus the communal need of the classroom as a whole. And my response to that is, well, what communal need? And I think that's what I hear you asking, is what communal need does this book serve? Like, if I get my way, because this is the way I kind of look at it. It's kind of a, let's play the thought experiment of what's gained and what's lost if we go one way or the other. If this book is not taught, my kid / I gain not having him exposed to this material that I think causes more harm than any potential good for him, right? That's the gain. Pretty big, pretty significant in my view, obviously. What's the loss to the rest of the kids? They don't get to go through that experience of talking about sexual assault in classroom and reading a book that has depictions of it. Wow, how are they harmed by that? How is their life worse? What are they deprived of by not going through that experience?
Yeah.
And I don't see how it goes back to the question we were talking about earlier about academic value. What's the academic value of this book? And I just don't know and it doesn't seem like when you go through those discussion questions, it doesn't seem like academic value is what they're getting after with these questions. I mean, there are some people who think that Speak should not be read by young adults or taught in high school classes. They feel that the themes, including sexual assault, depression, and peer pressure, are not appropriate for students to read about. In fact, in 2010, a Missouri State University professor named Wesley Scroggins called Speak soft pornography and argued that the book should be banned in public schools. Do you think that Speak should be read in school? Why or why not? That's a discussion question for the students in relation to this book. What academic discipline is that question forwarding or advancing? This seems to me, and a lot of the arguments and comments for this book that I've encountered in the online discussion about it, the premise seems to be we need to affect how kids think about sex. That's the objective. Not teaching them the right, not teaching them to think, not endowing them with a skill set that they can take out in the world and do something productive with. But we need to affect their morality. That's not your job. That's my job. That's the job of whoever I delegate that to, my pastor, other family members, people who I choose to trust with the moral education of my child. That is not the scope and appropriate range of public education to formulate my child's morality. No, especially when it comes to something as personal and is there anything more personal than sex and sexual relationships and how we deal with sex in the culture and in our interpersonally?
No, not usually.
We call it intimacy, right? So you're dealing with the most intimate aspect of our lives, and you want to have a communal conversation about the morality that should govern that against my will? I thought that's the irony here, right? Is that this whole thing is about consent. Whole thing is about consent and how horrible it is to violate it, which it is horrible to violate consent. But then you're going to violate my consent as a parent. You're going to violate my child's consent by imposing this on them. You're gonna poo-poo the fact that you're causing trauma and triggering people who actually have had this horrible experience, 15-year-old girls who are in your classroom. You're just going to bowl past all of that and force yourself, in a sense, on them. That seems a little ironic to me.
Yeah. So
I don't know. To me, it's seems like it's kind of a layup as to why we shouldn't have this in the school. I'll go through a couple quick comments here. I did say when I first posted this that I was going to cut it off at noon just to have some sort of constraint, because otherwise, we could go all day and nobody needs that. Catch up on a couple comments here. So Jason says, in response to Dawn, who was the lady who so graciously joined us earlier, parents need to parent, schools need to educate, public schools need to stop teaching to the lowest common denominator. Fair enough. Jason also says, there's the argument from authority. The teachers have master's degrees. You're just a parent. The change and solution, let parents discuss morality with their children. Yeah. So, and again, I brought this up when I talked about the second school board meeting where a gal got up in defense of having this book in the curriculum. And that was basically her point, is we know better than you what your kids ought to be exposed to and how.
Yeah.
And we're going to meet the
Just wanted to give you a hug.
Okay.
we're going to meet the need that we feel is a deficit in your parenting.
Mhm.
No, that's you don't get to decide that. Let's see. Sonia says you can ask to be put on the school board agenda. Okay. Maybe we'll do that. Christopher says, I appreciate Walter's patience and what sounds like moral relativism being argued here. Level of education attained by decision makers and the length of time a problem has existed are not rational arguments for the status quo. Yeah, I mean, and you get that a lot of the, why do you care? I always find that to be an interesting question. Like, why do you care and why now? The answers to those questions may be interesting, but they have no bearing on the merit of the argument, right?
Yeah.
It's either a good book to have in front of 15-year-olds or it's not.
Mhm.
And the fact that it just came to my attention, I don't know what the implied qualification to have an opinion is. Like you have to have been in this fight since 1999 and been talking about this the whole time for the past 20 years in order to know. I just don't know what the premise is there.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask what I mean, the book could have been around for 30 years. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's lots of things that went on in the medical community in the 1900s that they finally figured out are not good.
Right.
And then also the whole, I think you could I was looking into going back and getting my master's in psychology, and it occurred to me that I don't think I would survive on a college campus nowadays. Because
no doubt.
I would be looked at as, someone that's just doesn't get it. I'm just not, I am not with it. I don't understand. And then therefore, I mean, I feel like that kind of goes to just because you've got a master's degree or a degree, or depending on the college. I mean, you've got Yale law students demanding that they don't want to take their finals because they've been their feelings have been hurt.
Right.
Like, is that what you want in your lawyer? I mean, I think we've gotten to a point where higher education beyond high school is becoming increasingly a joke.
Kelly says teachers claim that some of these graphic books are helpful in teaching students about sexual violence and that it is bad and that it would lead to prevention. I assume she means sexual violence is bad and that teaching these books would lead to prevention is the premise. I don't have to have rape described in graphic detail to know that it would be a horrific experience. Explicit language about sexual scenes is grooming them and setting them up to be victims of grooming, abuse, and trafficking. So there's a couple different ideas wrapped up in that comment. And the first one I definitely agree with, which is that I don't need to, when I sit down to have a conversation with my kid about the birds and the bees, which I have,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to go to the store and buy a copy of Hustler, if that's even still a thing, and bring it home and be like, all right, here's how this works, right? Like you don't have to expose your kid to the explicitness and the graphicness and the most debauched version of something in order to convey what they need to know about it. Like there's certain, and this, we do this, that's what the whole concept of age appropriateness is that there are ways to essentialize ideas that are digestible for young minds and appropriate to the circumstances that they are likely to find themselves in. And that aren't going to do more harm than good. That's the whole concept of age appropriateness. And what I'm arguing is this is not age appropriate for a 15-year-old in high school class. As far as the whole, the grooming angle, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know that I would go that far with it, of saying that there's something malicious in placing this in front of the kids. I think that there's a sincerely held belief amongst educators that this has value for the purpose of somehow solving the problem of sexual assault amongst this age group. And I just disagree with that premise.
Yeah. I mean, you hear all the time about where the US is in relation to other countries as far as reading. And I mean, where, what's, reading, writing, comprehension, math. I mean, how many times have you heard these statistics that we are in industrialized nations, near the bottom? Well, and this was kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. Well, I don't think we've gone up the ladder in the last 20 years. And then I feel like this book, other things that are going on, well, look at what we're focusing on. I mean, right. I would say that lots of times it is, to get just political for a second, the complaint of more on the left that, well, college is are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm just having visual problems here.
Got it. The college campus is a rape culture. Well, that may be, but I don't think you find too many college campuses that are completely, overwhelmingly run and exhibiting conservative type values. That's a very liberal society. And then the school systems are also completely run by the left. And I don't think we're climbing that ladder as far as the world goes, comparatively to other countries. And I guess my point is, look at what we're having to talk about. What is the significance of this book in an English class or the next book after it? And possibly even to another question of hers, well, at some point, if you do manage to get a whole bunch of these books out, if the next one, if 5 more come along and you get them out, maybe then the people making the curriculum will go, maybe we should just go back to the fundamentals.
We're officially over time, so I want to wrap this up. I want the last word to be from a critic. So here we go. Karen Brown says, I sure hope you're planning on teaching your own children, because you don't seem to think STMA schools do a good enough job. All the teachers out there vote for the other candidate. Okay.
Solid argument.
So let me take this seriously.
I don't think you ever said that.
I don't seem to think STMA schools do a good enough job.
I don't think you said that ever.
No, I didn't. But what I did say, and what I stand by, is the idea that if you're going to come to me asking me for more money, which they're doing this November with Operational Levy, then you better believe I'm going to take under consideration what you're going to do with that money. And if it includes putting depictions of sexual assault in front of my 15-year-old, that's going to have an effect on which bubble I choose to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
Rightfully so. But I think the second thing she says there is even more interesting. All the teachers out there vote for the other candidate. I don't take for granted that all the teachers would be offended by this conversation, or would even necessarily disagree with me that this isn't something that should be put in front of the kids. I don't take that for granted. I certainly hope that's not the case. I certainly hope that as a teacher, you don't feel as though it's your job to make up for parental deficits by teaching things that parents don't want to be taught to their kids. If that's your attitude, and I don't want to put words in my opponent's mouth, but if that's your attitude and if that's what my opponent stands for, then by all means vote for her. But I'm not that cynical. I think that there are a lot of teachers out there who would be more than happy to address parents' concerns regarding this if they had the flexibility to do so. But there are a lot of reasons, institutional reasons, which the conversation we had with Dawn highlighted, that you can't have that type of genuinely transactional relationship with a teacher. Where, hey, here's my concern. Oh, okay, solution, right? Like that's not how this works. No. That's how it would work under educational choice, but that's not how it works under the current public education system. So that's where we'll leave it. I appreciate everybody who tuned in, everybody who's watching this after the fact. I enjoyed this. I think it was productive. Yeah. Hopefully there's a sense that there was value in being part of it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to toss up my email. So anybody who watches this after the fact can feel free to contact me if you have further feedback or interest in follow-up or want to be connected with this group of parents that is taking action on this, or be updated on wherever things go. So Dan, thank you very much for your time. I know you sacrificed to be available today, and your moderation and being my straight man who I got to play off of was very, very valuable.
This is a blast. I'll do it whenever you need.
All right. Everybody take care. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Okay. See ya, everyone.